of Manchester Airport because you were allowed to go on the roof then and you could walk right up close to the aeroplanes. And I saw the entirety of British Airways' BAC 111 fleet, except for one aeroplane, and that still galls me today. But unfortunately now I'm a silly old city boy in a gilded tower in Canary Wharf, paid too much to work too little. And my job is to guess whether to make insightful analysis to guide people whether to buy or sell different airline shares. I'm an equity research analyst concentrating on airline and airport shares. So I should say that, in terms of the way investors look at airline stocks, they are quite short-term trading stocks. And, if someone holds a share for 3 weeks, that's quite a long time. Here, today, we're debating the future runway policy for Great Britain. It's obviously a much, much longer time horizon, and I'm going to try and remember to think on a long-term basis. But I'll come back to that point towards the end of my presentation, because a conflict of time horizons between politicians, airlines and airports, I think, does make the whole debate really quite challenging. What I was going to talk about, little brief commentary about airline profitability. Then we're going to talk about short-haul low-cost, where the long-haul low-cost works, the relevance of hubbing for long-haul traffic development, a little bit about traffic distribution rules, and as I mentioned, time horizons. Doesn't that sound exciting? You're already yawning, you buggers. So, the airlines are rubbish. The airline industry is a very, very bad industry. This is a complicated economic graph, but what it tells you in the black line is how much money airlines make relative to the amount of money that's invested in the industry. And the red line tells you how much it costs airlines to get that money. So if you're making less money than it costs you to get that money, you are destroying economic value. You are pouring money down the toilet. And for the last 30 years, for every year, except for 2, the airline industry has destroyed economic value. So it's very important to bear in mind at all times that the airline industry is a very, very challenged industry economically. They may produce profits, but they're not producing enough profits to match what it costs to borrow that money to buy those shiny aeroplanes. So the airline industry is an incredibly marginal industry from an economic perspective. And so if you just think, oh, well, we can just pop up the airport charges here, or, oh, we'll just make them fly there, because, well, it's not ideal, but there's space. Anything that hurts the economics of the airline industry is going to be very, very sensitive. However, it is fair to say that here in the UK, though that graph was for the global airline industry, here in the UK, we have a better airline industry than most other parts of the world. EasyJet is creating a good amount of profitability and indeed is earning its cost of capital. It's creating economic value. So does Ryanair from across the sea, but obviously operating very heavily in the UK. And IAG, which is the merger of BA and Iberia, is also a very successful airline. And given the trend of the red line, which is them, becoming ever more successful at the moment. So we are lucky in the UK. We do have a successful, strong, vibrant airline industry compared to many other parts of the world. To which end? At the moment, in terms of profitability in the world airline industry, it is very much a divided world. The US airline industry is making pots and pots of money at the moment, absolutely loads of industry, and loads of money. And Latin America is okay. Europe is soggy, Africa's hopeless, and Asia is very much struggling as well. So they are very different trends, but the airline industry struggles. So, bearing in mind that it's a rubbish industry, okay, let's leave it there for now. Let's move on, and you'll all be aware, and heavens above, looking out here, I can see enough blooming Ryanair planes going past, to realise that the low-cost industry has taken dominance. It's taken an absolute stranglehold, if they're not grabbing some other body part, of the short-haul air transport industry. And that comes from costs. So here you go, you've got some unit costs here of different airlines and how far they're flying. Because the further you fly an aeroplane, the lower your cost per mile becomes. That's what that line tells you. But, we've got different scales here, because the average cost of IAG, that's your British Airways, is coming on 11 cents a kilometre. And here you are at Ryanair, it's 4, even though you're flying much shorter. The unit cost advantage of the low-cost carriers is absolutely huge. Let's move it on. Why have they got such radically lower unit costs? It's fairly straightforward. They stuff loads more seats into the aeroplanes, which if your knees have close contact with your friend in front of you's back, you'll know about that. So many more seats in the aircraft on the low-cost carriers compared to the flags. The low-cost carriers, as you'll be aware, as you go to check in for your low-cost flight at 6 in the morning, haven't got up at 3 in the morning, or did you not bother going to bed, they fly their aeroplanes many, many more hours than the flag carriers. Low-cost carriers here flying their planes 10, 11 hours against 8 hours for your British Airways, and God rest him, I can remember in British Midland. The cost in terms of airport charges or ground handling costs are much higher for the flag carriers than for the low-cost carriers, because they've got fancy schmancy lounges, they've got more check-in desks when you go to check in, because they have to have one for priority bankers because they can't stand in a queue with anyone else. And there's obviously a lot of concern about connecting bags, which is obviously very expensive as well. Labour, heavens above. Yeah, the people who work for the flag carriers do get paid a little bit more than the people who work for Uncle Michael, that nice O'Leary chap. So SAS pay more than Norwegian. Air France, IAG and Lufthansa pay a lot more than Easy, Air Berlin, Ryanair or Vueling. And not only that, but in terms of not just what they're paid, but how hard they work. What are we measuring here? How much capacity, how many seat kilometres per employee of the business? Lots more at Easy or Ryan than British Airways or BMI. So the low-cost carrier staff paid a lot less and work a heck of a lot harder as well. Let's move on. And, you know, it's not just because you go low-cost carriers. Well, they're ever so cheap, aren't they? And yet, the low-cost carriers do better in terms of revenue than the flags. Heavens above, how can that be? Because, honestly, I just, last week, went on the websites and looked what's it going to cost to fly to Venice, because it's a nice place. And it's cheaper at EasyJet than it is at British Airways. Well, there's a surprise, darling. And if you want to buy the posh EasyJet business class fare, yeah, let's not think about that too hard. It's more expensive, but it's a heck of a lot less expensive than the British Airways posh business class fare. But, oh, champagne, it's lovely. However, EasyJet fares a lot less than British Airways, and yet EasyJet are getting loads more money per aeroplane. How can that be? Well, if we start with a flag carrier, a British Airways, earning 100 quid as an index, EasyJet loads more seats in the aeroplane. EasyJet flying the aeroplane a ton more each day. EasyJet flying the aeroplane a great deal fuller. They're getting loads more revenue per aeroplane than BA. Then, okay, there's quite a difference in the fare, as you can see, so the fare is cheaper. And then EasyJet are not carrying any connecting passengers, so if someone's flying from Venice to London to Los Angeles, the amount of money that goes to that Venice to London leg is bugger all. So it helps that EasyJet are only carrying people between London and Venice. And there you go, Bob's your uncle, or he might not be, he might be Phil. But in any case, you're getting lots more revenue out of EasyJet from one aeroplane per day than British Airways. And they've got lower costs. And heavens above, let's move it on to the next one. The future belongs to them, right? So the share of low-cost carriers in Europe has gone up from 10% in 2002 up to pushing on through 40% at the moment. That's in Europe. In the UK, it's somewhat higher than that. There are some other countries in Europe that have got slightly lower. But, you know, I think it's fairly fair to conclude that the future will continue to belong to the low-cost carriers. What shapes the thinking of low-cost carriers in terms of their network planning? Flexibility. Heavens above, they are dirty and flexible. They've got a new route. They've drunk champagne with the nice airport CEOs. We're celebrating. Oh, bugger me, they've cancelled it. They move and they're dirty and they're quick and they chop and they change their routes. So they're very, very aggressive at churning their routes to make sure they only fly the most profitable routes that they can pick and choose. Otherwise, EasyJet, obviously absolutely driven by profitability, chopping the weak routes all the time. Very keen on fortresses. EasyJet is very, very strong at Gatwick, very strong in Paris, Milan and Geneva. They build strength markets where they're quite dominant. They do care about business travellers, looking to build a strong network and travel options, high frequency on their routes, but also serving the leisure routes as well. Ryanair Until, a year ago, no, we're completely bloody different. Absolutely night and day different. Ryanair was an operationally driven company. They went, where can we get the cheapest costs? Where is we're going to get the most support from a regional authority? And built their network on the basis of cost. They've now changed. They've done a great big U-turn. They're becoming posh. They're becoming smart. They're becoming nice. And they're very much looking to develop their network much more akin to the way that EasyJet does. So they do care about low costs from their airports, but they're also trying to provide service to the business travellers as well. But I think the future does absolutely belong to the low-cost carriers. Let's move it. So why on earth do flag carriers even bother with short haul if they're having the living daylights kicked out of them? I think that's polite enough, by the low costs. Well, they want to feed their long-haul traffic, and we'll come to that in a moment. There is also demand. You know, they care about carrying the bankers, swigging the champagne on the way to New York, but the banker also wants to go to Zurich, to Frankfurt, to Madrid for business, and they need to provide those links as well to secure the loyalty and the ghastly addiction to the frequent flyer points. They want to defend. Honestly, take Gatwick. Maybe it doesn't make sense. What are they doing? It's a heavy leisure market. Why does BA bother flying Gatwick? Why don't they just close it down and concentrate on Heathrow? Oh, my word. If they did that, EasyJet would take over Gatwick. They'd have a monster great network. They'd be very attractive to business travellers because they'd have such a huge network, and BA would suffer at Heathrow. So out of defensive purposes, if nothing else, you see flag carriers having an interest in short haul and mopping up slots. And they want to be relevant to the consumers because growth in the future, growth is faster in leisure travel than in business travel, so they need to be relevant. So we see the flag carriers trying to restructure to try and stay relevant. Network carriers short haul, why do they choose routes? They look for routes that are important for corporate, they want to feed their traffic, and they're defensive to try and block slots. Let's keep it moving. So if short haul travel does belong to low-cost carriers, and low-cost carriers are very happy to spread throughout the country flying point-to-point flights, and regional airports are extremely relevant. What about the debate of long-haul low-cost? It has to be said that long-haul low-cost is a new and emerging prospect. The highest profile people who've tried it have been perhaps the premium long-haul low-cost people like EOS and Silverjet. They failed, but it was a credit crunch time. They would. And at the moment, we've got Norwegian doing long-haul low-cost, and Norwegian is certainly not proving profitability on long-haul at the moment. It's got to be clear that in the last year, that Norwegian has really started growing their long-haul low-cost. Their profitability has collapsed. However, it's got to be true. It's got to be said that that's in no way a clear indication that long-haul low-cost cannot work. It could be an indication that their execution is not yet finessed, I think. Is that polite? Point-to-point long-haul travel has been delivered by the charter airlines for a long time, continues to do so, and yet I don't think they're going to be the heart of the future of long-haul travel. It's going to grow, but remain a reasonably sized niche. The cost of flying places on very low frequencies is not efficient. You end up putting your crew up in hotels for very long time periods. Let's go. So thinking of long haul, and one of the problems for long haul low cost is that heavens above, premium revenues really do matter on the long haul a great deal. And here is just some fares. What was he doing? London, New York. Economy class, bugger all. Premium economy, £1,000. Business class, £2,500. First class, darling, it's the only way to fly, £8,000. Heavens above, that's big bucks, isn't it? And that really matters, even once you've taken into account corporate travel discounts, which major corporations get. And if we look at, say, the configurations of A380s, those big lovely birds, 1/3 of the seats, quarter to a third of the seats are premium seats, and given the amount of space those posh flatbeds take up, we see about half the aircraft or maybe more taken up with premium real estate. So, premium revenues are extremely important, and they do serve to cross-subsidize the back. Long-haul routes need feed. If we look at the flights of KLM in Amsterdam or the Germans in Munich or Frankfurt, about 70% of the traffic on board those flights are connecting. In Paris, it's slightly less. It's about 50%. BA at Heathrow, it's about 30 to 40%, depending on the time of year. Now, you know, the UK, and London in particular, is a huge origin and destination market, and Heathrow does not have enough runway space to allow a proper hub with proper connecting flows, which is why they're much lower. But in principle, if Air France didn't carry connecting flights, didn't carry connecting traffic on their flights, the great big hub at CDG could probably support about 15 long-haul routes. As it is, it supports, I don't know, a gazillion. It has more long-haul flying than London. It has a huge, huge network. Let's move. And indeed, if we look at the long-haul flying from the regional UK airports, so this is everything except London, hubbing is terribly important. The long-haul flights that we've got coming out of the regional markets in the UK, that much of them are hubbing flights, and these are the point-to-point. And the carriers, you know, the biggest carrier clearly is Emirates, and then we've got the other Gulf carriers, Etihad and Qatar. We've got some of the Americans, US Airways and American, maybe we should combine them, and Delta and so on. And the point-to-point people are the holidaymakers, TUI, and we've got Thomas Cook on there. And then we've got some of the South Asian carriers as well. So like Pakistan, carrying the point-to-point traffic from the UK regions to South Asia. But predominantly to support long-haul flying in the regions. Yet there's not a hub in Edinburgh, but heavens above, they're doing well, getting a ton of new long-haul flying in. But it's absolutely reliant on hubbing. And long-haul flights do not work without hubbing, much the same for Newcastle with their established Dubai and more North American coming in. So hubbing is absolutely fundamental. There is also a debate now that's commonly said, one hears it, that the new aircraft types, the 787s and the A350s, are going to make hubs less relevant, and they're going to overfly hubs. This I would challenge. If we look at the current 787 operations that are flying today, this December, all of the red ones are the hubbing airlines of 787s, and we've just got Jetstar, Norwegian, and TUI. A very small percentage of people who do not carry connecting traffic. And indeed, Norwegian connect. Yes, they're a low-cost carrier of sorts, but they have people connect in Oslo, in Stockholm, and indeed even in Gatwick. So the idea that 787s break hubbing, I don't think is right. And if we look at the people who have ordered the 787, and heaven knows a lot of people have, 84% of them are old-fashioned traditional carriers. 3% of them are new-fangled point-to-point low-cost carriers. And okay, there's 13% of lessors, and you know, Norwegian are taking 787s from lessors as well. But 787s are going to be traditional flag carrier aircraft. And the fact that they're a bit smaller, well, you know, when you invent a new aeroplane, it's more efficient. Therefore, you get lower costs. Therefore, you can support a smaller aeroplane, because in principle, a small aeroplane has higher costs. But because you've got new technology on board that aircraft, it offsets the shrinking of the aircraft. But what you'll see over time from all the airlines is that they'll want bigger and bigger 787s. We saw it the same when the 777 came in. People bought it and you go, oh, it's so much smaller. They used to fly jumbo jets, now they fly 777s. And suddenly the 777s are getting bigger and bigger and longer. And people want big aeroplanes. So in terms of long-haul fleet planning, what drives airlines to pick routes? It's all about demand and supply, but heavens above, hubbing is critical to almost every long-haul route decision, other than charters, to be fair. Regulatory structure, because the airline industry is not fully deregulated, so that has a great deal of power in shaping how the industry works. History and geography. The passenger flows are very much shaped by history and geography. No surprise that all the routes to Latin America go out of Madrid. No surprise that there's strong demand to Pakistan and India from the northwest, or indeed from Glasgow, but less so, say, from Edinburgh. So history and geography and migration flows are terribly important. Economics, of course, vibrant economic growth in China. People want to get into China. That's straightforward. Quality of competition. Yes, that's interesting, because it's surprising how little flying British Airways does, for example, to India, which is a fast-growth market. That's a market which is very aggressively attacked by the Gulf carriers. BA very cautious there. Fleet, have you got the right planes to get there? And partnerships, can you cooperate with other airlines? So, I would argue that short haul, the future belongs to low-cost carriers, and that can permeate, across regional airports everywhere. For long-haul flying, hubbing is absolutely critical, and if the UK is to develop a broad network of long-haul destinations, it will need the support of the hub. Now, I'm not saying anything about where that hub should be, but hubbing is absolutely critical, be it in the UK or at the other end of the route, to the development of long-haul flying. In terms of traffic distribution rules, can't the government just say, oh, stuff it, sod London, you are going to fly to Birmingham? Well, we did see traffic distribution rules, government dictating where people fly in the past, yeah? There were rules that, certain routes could only be flown out of Gatwick to Jeddah and Houston, and certain routes could only go to Heathrow, say. Did that make British Caledonian, who was gifted Jeddah, gifted Houston, gifted Atlanta, did it make it a successful business? No, it didn't. It put constraints on the market and made that grow more slowly. Another example was, the UK-US market used to be tightly constrained, and only 2 UK airlines and 2 US airlines were allowed to fly to Heathrow. That meant that there was quite a vibrant service at Gatwick by the other airlines who weren't allowed into Heathrow. But the moment that was liberalised, all the airlines did move to Heathrow because that's where the natural market was, and there was much more vibrant growth. So this is an industry which, seen from over 60 years, 100 years, has liberalised intensely. Were you to re-regulate the UK market through traffic distribution rules, telling airlines where to fly, it would impact the growth of traffic, the growth of routes, and the profitability of airlines. There's another example in Milan, but in the interest of time, I think we'll keep it moving. And so, to time horizons, because I meant to talk to you about the reaction of airlines to the good work of Sir Howard. Pretty hard to get any sense out of airlines. Pretty hard to get sense out of an airline analyst, but that's by the by. That's what my wife says anyway. The financial markets have got a terribly myopic, very, very short time horizon. Airlines will work on a rolling business plan of 3 to 5 years. Their fleet plans might stretch out to a lengthy 10 years out. How long does it take to build an airport? Oh, dear Lord, don't even answer that question. Hang on, we're meant to be doing that today, aren't we? But there's a dreadful, dreadful mismatch between the time horizons of airports and of airlines. And equally, there's a rather nasty mismatch between politicians and planning as well, because they're focused on an electoral cycle, but that's another matter. So it is quite hard to get a Willie Walsh of IAG, or a lovely Caroline from EasyJet, or a charming Michael from Over the Water to engage materially in the airport debate, which is going to impact how the UK economy is looking in 30 or 40 years' time, when they've got a much shorter time horizon. And, they do have short-term vested interests. British Airways bought BMI to take control of its slots at Heathrow. That gives them growth capacity for the next, 5 years, 10 years. Were someone to wave a magic wand and create more slots at Heathrow, build a runway, that would be wasted. And yet, the runway is not going to be built for 30 years, so it would be completely different. But there's a horrible, horrible mismatch. Caroline McCall has done much the same thing, building a very strong portfolio at Gatwick, with the leading slot portfolio at Gatwick. Gatwick is full. That's of great value competitively, because she's the most powerful person there. Were another runway to be created, she would lose it. And yet that is short-term thinking, and this is a long-term decision. So in terms of time horizons, at the risk of being cynical, it's very, very hard to get the airlines to commit publicly to sensible debate in this terribly important long-term national debate, because their time horizons are terribly mismatched. And I think I've probably created enough trouble by now and bored you for long enough, so you can wake up now. The Economist is going away, and have a nice afternoon. Thank you.